Thank you very much for joining us on the second night of R&D presentations for Miniature Museum and test transmission from the edge of the world. Firstly, just a quick welcome to Digital Lyceum if this is your first time. So my name's Sam Redway, and I'm one half of Knaïve Theatre presents a Digital Lyceum, which is an initiative to try and find a way of promoting and presenting digital work and connecting audiences with the people who are making digital work, and connect over conversations about where we're going, where we've been, and what's going on at the moment in digital art, that in kind of a strange replacement for live art. And so our next event in what has been a 6-week season so far of 8 tonight, as you should probably all be aware, is test transmission from the edge of the world by Miniature Museum, Radiophonic and Jonny FluffyPunk, and they have been playing with extraordinary soundscapes played through vintage radios in an immersive way, and we have tried to facilitate this being an experience that you can have over an online digital format, rather than being surrounded by the radios in real time. Is there a way we can do that digitally by using the binaural mic that we have as a company and have been using to create the work of our own through this lockdown? So at the moment, Miniature Museum and all the rest are in the Stroud Valleys Artspace in Stroud, in the St. John's Gallery, and they are going to take away the rest of the evening. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the act.
Hello, people out there in internet land. Thank you very much for coming along. My name is Jonny FluffyPunk. I am a stand-up poet and theatre maker. This is the John Street Gallery of the Stroud Valley Artspace here in Stroud, where we have been in residence for two and a half weeks, experimenting. You see all these radios. That was something that did some workshop with some art students, built that. All these radios in here come through the gate. This is the Radio Hut, which is kind of the centerpiece of the things that we are doing. This is a mobile, it's going to be a mobile art installation for people to interact with, and theatre space, basically theatre space as well. And what you're going to see this evening, come inside. What you're going to see this evening is some sort of snatches, really, from the experiments that we've been doing. This is Tara from Miniature Museum, who is basically responsible for all the sounds. And these are all our radios. And we're going to see excerpts from a work in progress of a show which I started as a storytelling show. So it's a lot of words at the moment coming out of my mouth, coming out of my face. But as our experiments progress and as this show development progresses, more and more of those words are going to be coming out of various of these radios that we are transmitting to live by AM transmitters and mixing through mixing desks. And each of these radios they're all old, they've all got their own individual character, their own voice. This big wooden beast, this is the kind of one you hear wars declared on. It's quite a somber character. This one here is a lot more of a crackly and tinny. This is more what your dad would have had in the garage in the 1950s. So it's got that kind of everyman feel. This one's quite a squeaky beast, very high pitched, things like that. So you sort of play, what we've been doing is playing with all these sort of timbres and resonances of voices. And gradually these are, matching different bits of play, different bits of text up with different characters to perform them, really. So, yeah, that's what most of the bits of film you're going to see are us playing around with this story, with how we're going to be doing these kind of radio collaborations, I suppose you could call it. And Tara's been experimenting a lot more with sound and radio, because the whole idea of this all came out of an idea to do an installation that can tour around. We've already done trial residencies in museums, things like that, where it acts as a focal point for gathering people's stories, which can then be fed into little live theatre shows that we'll be creating in each space we are in residence. But also this show that I'm developing at the moment is a standalone theatre show that goes with it. But yeah, you can hear some of the scroachy noises coming out of things. All this stuff. So this whole project grew out of Tara began this in Amsterdam. She lives in Amsterdam half the time. So this is an Anglo-Dutch project. Her and her partner Bart built the Radio Hut.
Yeah, so Bart and I started Miniature Museum several years ago, where we make installations with automata and sound and light. And so Radio Droogdok project started in Amsterdam as a kind of sound exchange project, but we built the hut as an installation, and it quickly became just such a beautiful thing for people to sit in and share stories. And part of my development in sound and collecting sound and mixing things for our installations sort of has grown through this project. And the Radio Hut became this collecting space for lovely conversations, a place to play things out of, and then a collaboration with Jonny, which came about. So we've just got more and more excited on our whole radio magic theme. And thanks to Bas Bossinade in the Netherlands, where Bart and I have been this summer collecting these radios, you'll hear a little bit about that at the beginning of the stuff that we start playing, a bit of where this came from. We've come back with these beautiful radios from him, and some of these homemade ways of mixing between speakers within existing radios, but also transmitting to some live radio, old medium wave valve radios. So it's a mixture of using the innards to work and actually transmitting as well. A sort of live mixing valve radio DJ steps possibility. So
the films you're going to see are basically snippets of all of those experiments.
Just as like Sam said at the beginning, he came in for one day with a binaural mic only a few days ago. So we've included some bits of that where it's just quiet. So what you can expect is some sound pieces near the beginning where it's just dark, there's a slide holding the space, and you can just listen. And there are other bits with film with the sound, which is partly binaural or partly filmed. And we'll explore in the artist talk afterwards a bit, just about the quality of, what those different sounds are. And we've got a long way to go with exploring mixing them all together in new ways. So I hope you enjoy that.
hope you enjoy all of it. Wear your headphones.
In 2018, Miniature Museum started Radio Droogdok project. We visited Bas Bossinade, our electronics guru in the Netherlands, for inspiration, advice and stories on anything radio related.
Yeah, it knocks me out tremendously. Your love for me.
Came here. Oh my god, never been up here before. Wow. Okay, I'm going to Bas's attic. Yeah, I'm in. We haven't been up here before.
I thought you were.
I don't think so, but I remember going through all of the different upstairs schoolrooms.
This is my museum. And well, go anywhere. Yeah. Look, and here.
We saw a radio like that when we were searching, didn't we?
And here. And here.
Oh
so.
my god.
And what about Bakelite? And it's 3 rows deep, everywhere.
I've never seen so many radios in my life.
And all televisions and everything. And there's
well, there's the one like the one we got there.
And there's a ladder, so when you want to go up higher to check things out, take that one. And now I'm off.
Okay.
I'll see you in about 25 minutes.
No, do we?
So enjoy yourself here and get inspired. And everything is available for any project.
Okay.
See you later.
Tot zo. Doei. My god. How many radios?
Vitatron. Photometer system.
So we're in the attic of the Da Costa School, which is Bas Bossinade's business lightworks. And
it's more than just lightworks.
It's more than just lightworks. And he's a collector. And we've had electronic classes with him, experiments, quite a few years ago. And explored this whole school, 1930s school building with corridors full of all sorts of everything electronica. But I've never been up in this wooden attic. And now we're telling him about this radio project and came to see him. And there's these grey metal filing shelves things from floor to ceiling, 3 meters high. And they're completely full with every kind of radio imaginable. It's radio heaven.
Lille, Hilversum,
Rennes, Lisboa,
Vaticano,
Cresti,
Brussels, Monte Carlo,
Lyon,
Stavanger, Beograd, Firenze,
Sundsvall,
München,
Andorra,
Roma,
Moorside Edge,
England, Nancy,
Berlin,
Warsaw,
Tallinn, Leningrad,
Praha, Droitwich,
Helsinki, Droitwich.
People have been confronted with transmission and reception in a very strange way. For instance, in the Middle Ages, there were no electronics then, and sometimes there was a thunderstorm like 2 or 3 kilometers away, and it slowly came closer. And there's a lot of energy in there. And maybe you remember that when you listened to the radio, like Radio Veronica or those kind of stations, that when there was a thunderstorm, you heard when there was a flash somewhere there, and you heard it through the radio. Well, when you had a shed where some metal was involved in, or an old mill, then there were reports from people in the 16th, 17th century, before radio was there, that when there was a thunderstorm, a couple of kilometers away, that they were sitting and nobody had a radio, so it was quite silent, you know. And then suddenly they heard this somewhere from the building, because some metal structures together work as an aerial, and this aerial, these pieces of metal were kind of close together, and because of this potential difference from the discharge of the lightning, they came closer and further apart, and they gave a sound. So that's basically the first transmission from a thunderstorm to a mechanical construction which gave a sound.
I can't pretend to understand the mechanics of what was happening to him. It all seems like some sort of magic, and really it's probably easiest to see it that way. Radio is, after all wrapped up with the imagination, and I like imagining things and what-ifs and wonder. So, see it like this. We're surrounded all the time, everywhere, right, by unseen waves. And Jenny Murray and Brian Warden and James Naughty and the whole cast of the Archers and everyone else in the world of radio, they're around us, out there, all the time like ghosts. They exist in this other dimension. We can't see them or hear them, but they're there. And when you turn on the radio, it's like you're a medium at a seance. And you tune in and they come tumbling through from the other side, and the ghosts are there in the room, clear as day, talking about women's things and trade unions and the arts and all the other wonders from out there beyond our own kitchens. Far off across the shingle, there's a small clapboard and corrugated tin hut of the type elderly fishermen keep their nets in, lonely amid the scrubby shoreline weeds. An electricity cable runs out to it, strung from a line of wonky poles, and beside the hut, an antiquated aerial stands, a miniature pylon. There's hardly room for one in here, let alone three. It's just like a dim 40-watt bulb hanging from the ceiling. And the walls, they're lined with sort of makeshift benches and shelves. And on them there's all these antique radios. Bakelite cases and polished walnut cabinets, gleaming really beautifully in the half light. There's chunky switches and yellow dials, and there's cables looping and dangling everywhere. And there's a pair of headphones of indeterminate age and almost like military appearance. And there's a shelf of books. What's this? Oh look, it's Experiments in Radio. It's the book that Cromarty gave Emily all those years ago. And there's a few other books up around here too. And there's an old chair, and in front of it on the table there's an old Anglepoise clamp, and in that there's an ancient microphone. So this is the story of a boy. Let's just say he didn't really get enough attention as an infant. Not really, not for him. He didn't get enough attention because his mum, she preferred the radio. They lived out in this fairly dismal stretch of coastal Essex, and contrary to Essex stereotype, the radio in their house was tuned entirely to Radio 4. Theme tunes are etched into his young brain. Dr. Finley's Casebook, Down Your Way, Desert Island Discs, The Archers. This procession of warm, reassuring voices that underpin the whine of the Hoover and the kettle boiling for his mum's endless tea and the sound of the washing machine on full spin. As for his dad, well, I guess he's best just imagined really as a presence, hinted at by just these sort of bangings and intermittent noises from the garage. And if you listen really closely, you can hear his radio. Cricket in summer, football in the winter. Now this boy, right, he's had certain weaknesses as a baby. I won't bore you with the details, but it was all put right when he was still too young to remember. The upshot being that he came out of hospital in the middle of his second summer with a few bits of metal inside, pinning rejigged sections of him together. Nothing huge, don't get me wrong, no lasting discomfort. Just a few stainless steel pins, really. But it was enough. Now, his superpower revealed itself in his second year. Superpower, it's maybe a bit strong. He wasn't that much good for fighting crime or saving people from burning buildings or anything like that, but superpower is what they called it in the Daily Mirror. And who are we to argue? It was out of the ordinary at least. And to him, it certainly did have a superpower. It got his mother's attention. See, he became a radio. A human radio. The human radio. That's what they called him in the papers. You might remember it. You might not. It's all rather a long time ago now. So, right. It happened really suddenly. It was September. Autumn announced its arrival that year with this massive storm. You know, one of those end-of-summer party wreckers that just seems to barge through the door shouting, "Game over, you've had your fun, back to school, Mr. Grey Skies is in the building." Now, his mum has banged on about this storm so many times since then that he feels like he was actually there. Well, he was actually there, of course, but he was only 18 months old. He didn't even have a name yet. Imagine that. A nameless toddler. Now, his mum and dad had stared at him for a long time, waiting for a name to suggest itself, but nothing had come. He was a boy who suggested nothing. So, this approaching storm is looking like being a real humdinger. All afternoon, right, it's been getting darker, with that weird half-light and a definite tingle in the air. Evening came and went, and still the storm didn't break. It just got hotter and hotter and hotter and more still and uncomfortable. Toward midnight, his mum says she was upstairs sewing, radio on, with him, our nameless hero, restless in his cot beside her bed. His dad was out in the garage, the usual state of affairs. Suddenly, massive crack of thunder, the electrics go down just like that, the radio goes dead, the lights go off, and his dad's swearing echoes around the garden. Now, according to his mum, she turned to make sure he was okay, and she got a shock because he was stood stock still, suffused with the strange glow and gripping the metal bars of his cot. And then it began. He started broadcasting the late night
shipping forecast. His mum screamed. The scream brought his dad rushing into the house, stumbling up the stairs. His dad burst into the room, the beam from the kitchen torch strafing wildly around the room. The beam of the searchlight froze on the baby. Cromarty, his dad repeated. Cromarty, Cromarty. At that moment, the lights came back on. The radio blared out and the child slumped back onto his mattress. Cromarty. His mother just stared, repeating the word. Cromarty. We'll call him Cromarty. So that was how he got his name, Cromarty. It could have been a lot worse. The shipping forecast is a litany of evocative mysteries, and in those more innocent days, she could so easily have gone for Dogger.
I think at our school, Cromarty was generally appreciated. At that age, children are open and judgmental, aren't they? I'd often put Cromarty on the story carpet to broadcast a morning book serialisation or an afternoon drama. I mean, well, the adult content would just go over their little heads. However, most of the class seemed to prefer the Gruffalo to Anthony Trollope, and they soon got tired of it. They begged me to read them proper stories again, from the books on the shelves with the brightly coloured pictures. I gave in the end, and put Cromarty in a corner of the room. There was one child who insisted on sitting beside him, though, a wide-eyed and curly-haired little thing called Emily, who lived in the army houses on the edge of town and whose father seemed only to exist mainly in letters from overseas duty. She would just gaze up at Cromarty in wonder and drink in everything that burbled out of him. Whenever I tried to interest her in one of the picture books, she'd just say, no, the pictures are better on the radio.
Broken-hearted young men have done throughout history. He lost himself in other women. Cromarty, he was as crap and awkward as any of the rest of us of that age, but he did soon find his superpower, the radio thingy. It did lend him a certain advantage. All the trendy girls really liked him. They all adored Radio 1, and so they'd take turns to snuggle up with Cromarty, eyes closed and drifting, feeling his warm arms around them, and of course, in their heads, those arms belonged to the voice coming out of his mouth. Simon Le Bon or Nick Kershaw or that Gary Newman, singing to them and them alone and holding them tight. Cromarty just went along with it. I think it helped him avoid thinking about Emily. I think he forgot it wasn't him for himself they was interested in. They didn't give a toss really who he was or what made him tick. They couldn't give a shit for Russian literature and arts magazine programmes. It was radio, wasn't it? It was what was coming through him they wanted. It was like his mum all over again. So he just let these giggling groups of girls take him off to quiet corners, their big, beautiful eyes wet with tears, and from his mouth, Simon Bates narrated a tale of terminal illness and infidelity in a serious voice, and they played Africa by Toto.
So, Emily just moved on, and so did life, really. Stripped of his radio powers, Cromarty was just an ordinary bloke. The in-crowd lost interest. He just goes back to his own company, to reading, to the pleasures of listening to the radio. I guess without the problems of, well, being one. He pined for Emily at first, I think. That's what I heard, anyway. But the pain eventually subsided to that sort of numb bruising we all find we just have to live with, don't we? Heartbreak, growing up. The rest of his school career, well, it was pretty undistinguished. We had him down as a dreamer. I think he took it as a compliment. He did okay, he left, he didn't feel the call of university. No one seemed to be in a hurry to kick him out of the family home. So he stayed in town and got a job at a shipping company on the trading estate. Not the most exciting job in the world. It was something involving data entry, I think. But when I bumped into him in Tesco's, he told me he had his own little cubbyhole to work in, and provided he wore earphones and got what he was supposed to do get done, well, nobody really minded him, just drifting through his appointed hours with his head in radio land.
He learns how to tap out messages, gibberish at first, but he soon gets the hang of it. He was excited that somewhere out there, someone might tune in and find his signal and be filled with that same feeling that flooded through him. Just morse at first, for a fortnight or so. Then he starts using the microphone as well. Whatever came into his head or what he found in his bag. Recordings he'd made, snippets from Russian novels, fragments of poems, favourite lines from plays, songs he's heard off John Peel. All the stuff absorbed from years of programmes flowing through him. All the stuff that makes him tick, now turned into waves and radiating out from that rusty aerial into the ether like ripples on a pond. After that, well, Cromarty visited me granddad as often as he could. He'd get on the bus after work, he'd ride out of town, out through that painful halo, that's what he called it, that painful halo around Emily's old house, down to the seaside. And then he'd walk out through the grasses and the wind and across the empty shingle, and he'd knock on the door of that little hut. And my granddad, look, let's call him Gerald. It suits him. And anyway, let's face it, it's his name. Gerald welcomes him in, and they drink tea from a thermos flask, and they talk. And Gerald teaches Cromarty all about what he does. Amateur radio. I go with him sometimes, just for something to do. And see his face light up in the warm dimness. And that little hut fizzing and echoing to all the static out there in the night, with all those distant snippets of voices and strange music. The world felt enormous. Anyway, under Gerald's expert eye, Cromarty learned which knobs to turn and which switches to flick, and underneath those big heavy headphones, boy, you could just see it. He was himself, filled with wonder.
See, what Cromarty was learning was that when you were young, and when, like him, you lived out in the arse end of nowhere, radio was vital. Radio was what bridged the gap between where it was happening and where it so badly wanted to happen. Radio was the electric crackle in the night. It was rock and roll and decadence and danger. Radio was a potent weapon in the eternal war with the grown-ups. Radio pinned pop stars onto bedroom walls and led to arguments on the doorstep about going into town in that new Boy George hat. Radio was smuggled under bed covers and sneaked into stolen moments. Radio was sex. Radio was a bomb. And in the eyes of almost everyone who mattered, Cromarty was cool.
So this is the story of a boy. Let's just say he didn't get enough attention as an infant. Not really, not him. He didn't get enough attention because his mum preferred the radio. Now, they lived in a really dismal stretch of coastal Essex, and contrary to Essex stereotype, the radio in their house was tuned permanently to Radio 4. Theme songs are etched into his young brain. Dr. Finley's Casebook, Desert Island Discs, Down Your Way, The Archers, a procession of warm, reassuring voices that underpinned the whine of the Hoover, the boiling of the kettle for his mother's endless tea, and the washing machine on full spin. As for his dad, well, he's best more imagined, just as a presence hinted at by bangs and crashings from the garage, and if you listen closely, his radio. Cricket in summer, football in the winter. Now this boy, he's an only child. Now he's had certain weaknesses as a baby. I won't bore you with the details. Suffice to say it was all put right in his first year, but he came out of hospital when he was still too young to remember, with a few bits of metal inside, pinning rejigged sections of him together. Nothing huge, no lasting discomfort, just a few stainless steel pins, really. But it was enough. His superpower revealed itself in his second year. Now, superpower may be a bit strong. He wasn't much good at fighting crime or saving people from burning buildings or things like that, but superpower is what they called it in the Daily Mirror, and who are we to argue? It was out of the ordinary, and for him, it did have a superpower. It got his mother's attention. He became a radio, a human radio, the human radio. That's what the papers called him. You might remember it, you might not. It's all rather a long time ago now. And that's when it happened. He started broadcasting the late night shipping forecast. His mother screamed.
Becoming south or southeast.
And the scream brought his dad rushing into the house, stumbling up the stairs.
40s, variable 2 or 3.
His dad burst into the room, the beam from the kitchen torch strafing wildly.
Cromarty.
The beam of the torchlight froze on the baby. Cromarty, his dad repeated. Cromarty. And that moment, the lights came back on, the radio blared out, and the child slumped back on the mattress. Cromarty. His mother just stared, repeating the word, Cromarty. We'll call him Cromarty.
Cromarty. Cromarty. Cromarty. Cromarty. Cromarty. Cromarty. Cromarty. Cromarty. Cromarty. Cromarty. Cromarty. Cromarty. Cromarty.
So, this is the Radio Hut, full of radios. And it was in this, outside a jazz festival, that I first met Tara, and got interviewed. It was an empty thing that had been built on the side of an Amsterdam dock with the intention of doing some kind of project involving radios. And when I came in and I sat chatting to Tara, I came up, we just sort of said, I want to do something involving this. So this is where this show came out of. I came up with this. I wrote a show. It's a storytelling show about a boy living out on the Essex intertidal marshland, and he becomes a human radio, and there's this whole show. And it's all basically exploring imagination and radios and how it all interplays. And the whole thing was written just as a storytelling thing, is what we tried out, but the whole idea right from the off, which is what we're doing now in this residency, having got some funding and having had sourced loads of these beautiful old vintage radios, is that the show is going to be, we're working on redeveloping it, so the show is partly told by words coming out of my face in real life. But whereas previously it was all the words coming out of my face in real life, now large parts of the show are going to come in various forms through various radios with their intrinsic personalities that are going to be arranged around an audience in those beautiful far-off days when we can actually have one in real life. So yeah, that's the whole concept of it. And we came up with, and this whole radio hut is designed to tour around as an installation, and this show is performed in conjunction with it. I perform it sort of sat outside the hut using tech inside it, but the hut also serves as this gathering place for people's stories and people's interactions with radio, and people's to kind of archive people's interactions and feelings about radio, basically, and then with the idea of constructing live theatre, not only this show but making ad hoc theatre shows using the material sourced from other people. Bit of a convoluted way of saying that, but I'm sure you get the general gist. Yeah, so Radio Hut. Beautiful place, inspires everybody who sits in it. Good things will come.
some sort of magic, and really it's probably easiest to see it that way. Radio is, after all, wrapped up with the imagination. I love imagining things. What is? Wonder. So I see it like this. We're surrounded all the time, everywhere, by unseen waves. And Jenny Maria, Ryan Wilbunna, James Knockdeer, all the cast of the Archers, and everyone else out there in the world of radio, they're around us, out there, all the time, like ghosts. They exist in this other dimension. You can't see them, hear them, they're there. And when you turn on the radio, it's like you're a movie to someone. And you tune in and they come tumbling through from the other side, and the ghosts are there in the room, clear and steady, talking about women's spirits, and trade unions, and the arts, and all the other wonders from out there in the world beyond our reach.
There's Ronnie and just Ronnie and Phil. I guess let's. Yeah, I'm getting a few people saying let's just start. Right. So, thank you very much for coming back, everybody. And thank you for listening to the work. I'm going to very hand over to Tyrrell because I didn't get a chance to listen because I was manning the Zoom and all that kind of stuff. So, Tyrrell, over to you.
Hello, everyone. My name's Tyrrell. Tyrrell Jones. I'm the other half of Knaïve Theatre. Just like to say thank you to Radio Droogdok for and Jonny FluffyPunk for that wonderful show. Really happy to have them here at the Digital Lyceum this week. It's been really fantastic. So yeah, and Maco as well. And thanks everyone to who's been involved with that, because that's some really lovely work. I really enjoyed that, certainly. I guess all what we've been trying to do for the whole of our time with Digital Lyceum is to give artists an opportunity to test things out for digital platforms in a way that they might not otherwise get to do. So yeah, we've been doing our best to so the idea is that people get to experiment with things, ways of sharing work that they haven't done before. With digital audiences, and then we have an opportunity to talk about what we liked, what we'd like to see more of, to feedback to the artists to help them grow that part of their craft, their part of their work that we're all obviously just starting. Obviously, we're all adapting to these circumstances and experimenting with totally new formats and totally new ways of doing things. So your feedback is really, really valuable to the development of that. So thank you for coming and thank you for sticking around for a chat. So yeah, I mean, my first question actually was not to the artists, but to you, the audiences, because I think it might be really useful for them to hear your responses to this. But the question is, what is it about old radios? Because there's something about old radios. And I just wonder if you, the audience, have a personal connection to those ideas and those things that you might like to share to kick us off. Go on, Laura. Thank you so much.
I don't know if can you hear me? Because I'm on my phone, so I've never done it on my phone before. Oh, good. Okay. Thank you so much for that. I really, really enjoyed it. But I suppose we'll talk about that a bit more in a moment. But I think, I don't know, for radios for me, I mean, it was interesting for me listening to that because I just kind of was captivated by all the different radio sounds that I think that's probably just the musician in me, that I was just drawn to that more than the story. But I think that's just because that's how my ears tend to work. I was just fascinated by all the different qualities and timbres of the different radios. It was fascinating. But I think it's just that weird sense of nostalgia that comes with old radios. I mean, I've used like old tape players before, like the ones where you just record and then rewind and press play back, and I'm totally fascinated by those as well. So I think it is just that kind of, for me anyway, it's the nostalgia of it, and the kind of lo-fi quality of the sound.
Thanks, Laura. That's great. As anyone else would like to answer that question, what is it for you, the audience? What is it about old radios for you? Go on, Anna's iPad.
Well, this is very academic kind of answer. It's just being one of the oldest people listening tonight. That was our lives. You know, I went to the jumble sale. I bought a 50p radiogram that was about the size of my bedroom, and I would spend the night with my ear against it, twiddling to try and hear all you know, like those programs around the world. So for me, it's just brings back those wicked days of when Radio Veronica and things and Caroline started. It was so naughty in comparison, and even Luxembourg. But just trying to get them, you know, it was the fiddling and the doing. And so it just brings back history. But I guess I'm really enjoying contemporary, digital, modern sound, because we had to put up with that. Okay, I'm going to turn myself off now, quickly.
Anna, if you wouldn't mind, what is it? How does it feel having the mix of the contemporary modern sound and the old sound? Because you said it was something you had to put up with.
Well, when I say put up with it, you know, it's all we had, so it's very limited. I mean, it was great that, you know, I could buy a 50p radiogram. You know, it was vast, but I love the fact that technologically music and sounds can get more and more and more pure and more near to the real. And actually, I love that. Sorry.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because there's there's something really interesting about having the two together. Because obviously we had the binaural, which is very much quite a recent development in that the good ones have become affordable relatively recently, and it's obviously very, very high quality. But then we've also got playing into that things that have that kind of built-in those built-in flaws that we're actually that obviously Tara and Jonny, they're using that as an aesthetic, which is a particular aesthetic choice, and that communicates something to us now, which is, as Laura was saying, maybe nostalgic, maybe kind of transportative in a way that, but we're so used to listening to digital sound, there's now something really exciting about when it's not pure. And I think that's a really interesting thing to think about. I don't know if anyone else has any. Go on, Anna. Yes.
Well, it didn't come because of my technology here, which isn't, you know, obviously e-tops. And our headphones, it wasn't good enough. I couldn't really hear well enough to make it exciting. I was, you know, desperately listening, but actually, I think probably, you know, just haven't got good enough headphones.
Ah, interesting. That's that's good to know. Perhaps in future we can sort of work out some way of helping people with the spec and doing maybe a bit of a sound check or something like that. That might help at the beginning. But thank you for that. Yeah, Tara. Yeah.
I wanted to. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah.
I wanted to say, especially an incredibly important bit that's missing, because yesterday we had a whole bit where we spoke in the middle, and I've realised that I don't think it came in introduction. I want to say Maco McAleece, who's joining us here today, is an absolute kingpin, crucial bit of this whole thing. He started at the beginning of the project, training and inspiring me with bits of sound and teaching me how to sound edit, supporting me along the way. And he is actually responsible for putting together a huge amount of the whole lineup of the bits of stuff that we've been gathering, and some of the mixing of pre-recorded bits, some bits that I've recorded in the past. We only had the binaural mic a few days ago, and just processing this into something that we could pass on and show to people has been, just getting that and to be able to share it. And Maco's been doing an amazing job with bringing that together. So I just want to introduce and thank Maco for all of that. And he comes from a whole, and talking about this mixture of digital and radio stuff, you've come from station managing and radio as well, haven't you? And doing podcasting and being involved in sound engineering from early days. So it's very, and has been involved with other artists mixing stuff. So I'm really interested in this mixture of different qualities of sound that we can get from just combining all these technologies. And we've also found it's been quite tricky getting it across via Zoom and YouTube as well. But it's there's like layers upon layer, aren't there, of mixing all this stuff up.
Well, no, thank you. It is always good to hear when people have had slight difficulties with technology in different places. I think that's certainly something that we're learning. But Laura's saying she had a great experience with the sound and got the binaural quality, and that came across. So maybe there's just a checking different people's devices that would just be really helpful to help with those barriers there. Has anyone else got any comments to the question? What is it about old radios that they'd like to share? Brenda, yes.
Something to add. Yeah, I guess it's something of vintage radios that feels there's something magical. It's like a portal into another time or dimension or something. I don't know, but there's a mystery. And as Jonny was talking about, the character that they hold, and and just to say, yes, I had for the first time ever, I bought myself a decent pair of headphones, and I had a fantastic experience. This immersive sound. I was just, struck by just having the sense of sound, the proximity of sound, or different dimensions or sound, the sensation in the body, and just being able to absorb a lot of sound input at once. So I just enjoyed that experience. It was really rich, like this lovely tapestry of.
Great, thank you. Yeah, thank you. There's something really interesting about feeling like you're surrounded by radios. I really felt like I was there. Something that's also really interesting to me, particularly in terms of binaural work, because we've been doing a little bit of it as well, is how our audience actually receives it. So I think this might be interesting to know for Tara and Maco and Jonny, how you actually listen to it. Did everybody have their lights on? Did anyone turn their lights off? Did people close their eyes? Did people have headphones on both ears, or were they sharing one and one? And it always really interesting to know how people actually experience it, because I think one of the things that we're not very good at as artists is knowing when we don't get to control the whole space. This is certainly something I've found. So I'm a theatre director. I like to be able to control every little bit of the experience. And then when you send this over the internet, you can't do the lighting in people's living rooms, and you can't stop the postman knocking on the door. And so what I'm really interested in is what was it like for you where you were? What did you do? Did you do anything to heighten theatricality? Okay, so lying on my sofa, lights on, staring at the ceiling. Thanks, Laura. Anyone else like to share that? Because I know that it'd be interesting. I had the lights off, and and that was quite something. Just the lights of my keyboard were on, the LED lights of my keyboard, but otherwise in darkness, and that was quite cool. I enjoyed that. Tara, Johnny, or Mako, did you have any kind of ideas about how your audience might ideally listen to it, or do you mind?
Well, personally speaking, I mean, it's quite an odd and interesting experience, because this show has not, what wasn't conceived with something like that in mind. I mean, it's far more, was obviously originally conceived as me in a room with some human beings. So I was quite interested to see how that would come out, because my normal performance style and the way that this show particularly has been envisaged would have been for like small audiences in odd locations, because this is meant to be like a touring installation, so it wouldn't necessarily be a black box theatre space, but an audience with radios dotted amongst them, and with me moving amongst the people as well, moving from radio to radio amongst the audience. So the way I'd envisaged it was of an animated storyteller walking amongst people and sharing it. So I guess something like binaural, although I hadn't obviously thought of it for that, is possibly a way that you can convey that kind of experience in this kind of new paradigm that we're all having to live in. Because obviously, if you do shut your eyes and have your earphones on, I mean, you can feel somebody moving around you, which I don't think, I certainly don't think in what we did, in this little bit of experimentation, exploited that, or I think you'd have to place. For me, I would have to, you'd have to map out almost how you're going to move around, so that it had theatrical meaning to why I'd be in certain places and by certain radios at certain times. But it's certainly got potential for that. It has. Listening to your previous presentation, the breath
COVID lockdown
show.
Yeah.
COVID lockdown. I mean, sitting in that listening to that, and that was obviously a show that was conceived for that particular experience. It was an amazing feeling, having it shift around you like that, and to actually go into the first writing and conception of the show with that in mind. Its possibilities are brilliant, and something that I would be well up for exploring. If I'm not going to be able to run around inside an audience in real life, it's certainly got the potential for recreating that experience as best we can.
Do you have anything that you would like to ask the audience in terms of how much intimacy they felt, being at that distance, but obviously having that binaurality?
I can't think of anything directly I would ask. I mean, I'm always, especially since things have been like they are now, I'm interested just in how. Certainly, if the binaurality improved the sense of intimacy, would be important, because whenever I do shows, they always are intimate. That's what I like. I mean, I've never had any ambitions of being on stage at the National in front of 2,000. I would far rather be in a really small room. I can work and with a small group of people you're holding in the palm of your hand, and whether doing that, obviously, for the very reasons that you've just said, that you can't control people's ambient environment in their living rooms. If they're sat on the sofa with all the lights on, it's obviously very different to having that intensity of having somebody immediately around you. But did the binaurality make it feel more
like someone was actually in the room with you. Because I know certainly when I heard the Lockdown Breath show, it made it feel like that. You know, there were times where you sort of jolt your eyes open thinking, is there a giant spider in the corner? You know, it worked.
Well, I can certainly say that I thought there was someone revving their engine outside the house, and even though I know the technology, I was wondering. I was like, oh, what is going on? And then I realised that it was all part of it, and I always find that every time with binaural, I always get a shock like that.
Joe was going to.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, go back to why do we have this fascination with these old vintage radios? And for me, I think there's something about the physicality of turning the knobs, and it's like you're just like searching for something. It feels like you're literally searching for something in your head. And our equivalent now is searching for something on the web. You know, I think it just is something about the physical turning and searching. It's really kind of quite potent. But also radio is a very personal, private experience, I think. But it also brings lots of people together at the same time. So I think that's the power of it, of having the personal experience, like just Tara and I both sitting here with headphones, but actually we're doing something together, but we're having this very personal experience. And the power of the human voice can't be underestimated, because it just builds pictures in your imagination so strongly. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about, the binaural quality. So then switching on to sort of much more high-tech stuff, I think there's been a little bit of resistance to the binaural thing sometimes when we've been working on this. Not resistance as in, it's just because I would say, like, Jonny's got a very sort of low-tech kind of approach with things. Hence his like vintage videos. But actually, interestingly enough, the high quality, these incredible new technologies that are coming in are giving you the most natural experience you could possibly have. So I was saying to Sam when he came down about our surround sound system that we've had put into the Good Shed with D&B Audio. It's a surround soundscape. And because we're so used to just hearing sound from the front with gigs, you know, we just hear everything from the front. So when you go into the Good Shed and you hear the soundscape, it's almost like, it's just so natural that you almost can't quite define what it is, because that's how we hear things in our normal life. And it reminds me a bit of the binaural, and you sort of feel and sense it in your body as much as through your ears. And I'm very interested in the fact that this sort of like, you know, this new technology is coming out that's actually making things much more natural. It's putting a huge amount of like investment in terms of time and development, but actually the outcome is something that's actually really natural. That's quite interesting.
Yeah, it is. It's really, really interesting and really kind of, and one of the things I think that lots of people talk about is that almost corporeal experience. And, you know, Brenda said that as well. And the idea of feeling like you're there, or maybe that the things might be approaching you, or that you're the person breathing. That's one of the effects that you can also play with. And it does make you tense up a little bit. I was... One of the things I found myself really connecting with the radio waves as they were coming in and out. And it felt somehow like it was really just for me, because these radio waves are kind of whirling around my head. Like it was Jonny just reaching out through some radio magic. And somehow something about the lo-fi somehow is the same as something spiritual or magic or maybe uncanny.
No,
and
yeah.
Very curious.
Yeah,
but...
well, that's exactly how I feel about it. I mean, when you talk about the sort of old, and when I say old radios, I'm talking like just basically pre-digital, so sort of analog radios. Is that you have, whereas with digital, it either works or it doesn't. You know, you've either got a signal or it cuts out. Whereas with the analog, you have this. I mean, you have this thing of static, and the whole thing of the static to me feels like almost like a kind of metaphor for the great mystery, you know, and you're like connecting with the universe through this sort of I mean, this is the thing, like old analog radios. I mean, the signal is affected by, solar flares on the sun or the phases of the moon and star activity and all this kind of thing. You really feel like you're connected with everything through that. And when you're tuning in, and it is like you're sort of reaching out into the mystery, and suddenly something like a ghost, as I said in one of the passages in there, it is like you're sort of suddenly plucking a ghost out of this static fog, and this voice suddenly crystallizes out of it, kind of thing. I mean, it's so much more evocative than the modern experience, which is a lot more. I mean, for a start, you can't surf on the modern experience. You haven't got a dial to rotate. You keys into a certain channel and that's it, or you haven't got it. And the thing that one of the initial things that inspired me with writing this was the story of Lucille Ball, the comedian, who in the Second World War in 1942 was apparently walking through Los Angeles or Hollywood and picked up Morse code through her fillings, and in her head she sort of picked up, could hear this Morse code playing in her head through her fillings, and reported it, and they found a Japanese spy radio station broadcasting from the Hollywood Hills, and Lucille Ball found it through, it appeared in her head through no radio transmitter or anything, and that's the sort of amazing, fascinating thing. And I think we've all probably been at gigs or something where one of the guitarist amps suddenly starts picking up radio from the local taxi firm and things. It is a kind of, it's got a real like hauntological aspect to it, that it's something that feels so organic, almost, if that's the correct word, that that a child can make a radio from a piece of crystal and a potato to power it, and you can make a working radio that will pick up these signals. It's like we've discovered how to tap into something magic, as we as humans have suddenly found that by connecting some wires we can connect into some kind of magic that is out there all the time. And it's, I find it a really imagination spurring thing, and I'm sure a lot of all the internet technology is just as magical and just as weird, but it doesn't kind of get me in that immediate way of spinning a dial.
But I think that's the really interesting thing, is that I'm not sure all the internet technology does yet have that feeling of the uncanny that you're talking about. And I think that's what it's searching for. And I think that's the really difficult thing that everyone's been finding, everyone's been saying, who's been having to try things out digitally, is, the theatre in person, there's something magical about it. There's something special about everyone's heartbeats beating at the same time as they listen to something that people now know happens. There's something special about the fact that everybody gasps together, and everyone comes in together, leaves together. There's something about the communality of it. But then there's something about the analog technology which feels like it's a little bit of that magic. And I think what we're all doing is, in this reimagining time, is trying to find how you make this technology magic and not just totally prosaic and frustrating and like you're sat at the same thing that you do your work at every day, and how do you transcend that? And I think certainly you've done a great job of transcending that, because I felt like I had some magic coming through my headphones tonight, which I think is a huge thing. So I think there's something really interesting about this juxtaposition that you've got between something really high tech like the binaural microphone and really low tech all around it, and creating something more magical than either of the two could do on their own.
Yeah, there is certainly some huge amount of potential for a sort of symbiosis of those two things, for definite. Yeah, the binaural micro. You've probably got another motorbike you can hear coming through. The binaural microphone quality, the sort of quality of it, of making it
of making it feel like you've got those waves all around you, that it can help conjure that feeling of it being all around, which is the thing that, as you say, is totally lacking if you're watching theatre on the screen compared to actually being in the room with the acoustics of just acoustics surrounding you and the whole immersive experience of it. I think it's certainly a big key. It could potentially be a big key to linking those two worlds.
I think
early days for the technology, and early days for the theatrical explorations of it. And
absolutely.
Yeah, I'd just add something. I was going to say about this sort of this mixture of tangibility and ethereality of those things. What we're talking about, whether it's radio and tuning in, or the mixture of the sort of the simplicity and the magic of something, and then how we're talking about this binaurality kind of brings you that intimacy as well, and hearing those radio waves around you. And I found it interesting to how it was just laid out. There's a lot to explore and mix with all the sounds that we've got, but to try and just demonstrate a little bit by having that period of things that you could just listen to, and then repeating some of those and showing a little bit, just a little bit of an insight really about what was being recorded. Jonny sitting and talking to the hut or moving around the microphone, and then how we were trying to add different layers on it. And then throughout there are these mixtures of sea and soundscapes that were gradually over those longer pieces moving around radios here. But I'm just seeing the whole stretch of these things all in one go and listening to them now as well. But I liked to I was just wondering how that worked for everyone, actually, just to get that little bit of a demonstration, because it is just a little bit of like putting these things on the plate for you to see what's it like when you're just hearing with it, whether you're looking or have your eyes closed, and then the fact that we're just revealing a little bit of the process of how we were recording it at the same time, and then you're hearing it again.
That's a great question. Does anyone have anything they'd like to add or contribute to that sort of that difference between just hearing it and then hearing it and also seeing how it was done, or seeing where Jonny was in relation to things? Anyone got any thoughts or things that they'd like to contribute? Yeah, is that Brenda? No? You're on mute, Brenda.
Oh, I was just umming. Yes, I think it just added to the experience for me, to kind of shift between this kind of deep sensory experience and then come out in the visual and connecting those two. I enjoyed that kind of layering. And the different modes, I enjoyed that, with the theatricality of the story, and talking about your process and so on.
So useful. So
it wasn't
I certainly found, go on.
It felt like I felt like I was just taken along a little bit. It didn't feel jarring in any sense, or I had to shift. I felt I was just sort of zooming in and out, and it was just sparking my interest in different ways.
Yeah, I certainly think, what you've got is such a visually interesting. Obviously the Radio Hut is so beautiful. It's such a visually interesting thing to see, and to see the whole thing was really engaging and really interesting. At the end there, I was wondering if this could be quite easily the set of a sort of regular YouTube broadcast or interview thing or whatever. It can have a TV.
I wish I was going to say on this kind of lo-fi, hi-fi thing, and about the things that we connect to, is that the hut is also an example of that, because as it's been around in different places, people have just so overwhelmingly responded to the simplicity and the kind of tangibility of a little bit of corrugated tin and a cozy bit and some old Bakelite radios in it, and there's something about that simplicity. Going back to the sort of feel of radios and things as well, that has also allowed this intimacy to happen in collecting conversations from people and immediately sparking nostalgia and memories. And now we're, you know, the story has been projected from in front of the hut to an audience, and now it's really interesting to hear this more as the kind of what could be a really intimate, like, radio play type version that could be heard sitting inside the hut, or that might be on the radio, and that it's got these different elements, as well as, like we were saying, our next step from theatre to speaking out to audience was to have theatre with radios around throughout the audience. But it's just going deeper and deeper, you know, there's just different layers and ways of doing it that just, it's been so interesting to hear the quality of this sound through the mic as well, and how that brings that different ways that we can work with the story and soundscapes in general as well.
And we should talk about the story as well, actually. We haven't talked much about the story, and an amazing and really kind of evocative and story. And one of the questions I had was, such an interesting idea, the boy who is just a vessel and doesn't have much of a personality, and, you know, really, really, really interesting and unusual. And I just wanted to know where that came from. I think the audience would be interested in that as well.
Well, it was the original, the whole idea for doing a show about radio came from, you know, my interaction with this hut when it first arrived in town, and Tara had it out and just going in and talking. I was just immediately, I just wanted, and we were talking about this kind of thing, about how radio is just, it's so you know, it so connects. I mean, it's quite a banal thing to say, but it so connects with your imagination, so much more so, obviously, than something visual, because your mind has to work at it. You know, as is said in the show at one point, the pictures are better on the radio, because your mind, you know, it's everything that is. Every time you hear something over the radio, you know, there's as many different pictures. What am I trying to say here? If you're hearing a story over the radio, you know, it's the visual element of it is there's as many different views of what that scene looks like as there are people hearing it. And I found that I've always found that a really fascinating thing about radio. So it was this concept of a boy who basically lives for the imagination. He's like a kind of metaphor for the imagination, and over the course of the show he becomes more and more possessed by this thing. And in the, I mean, without wanting to give away the entire story or whatever, it's partly a love story, but the love interest disappears halfway through and then is only reconnected with towards the end, over the waves, as it were, plucked out of the airwaves. And it sort of attempts to raise various questions about, you know, is she is that love, is it something happening now, is it waves gathering now, is it something being plucked out of some different period of time, a signal that's being tuned into, is it live, is it now, does that person need to exist? So she becomes, in just being a figment of his imagination that he can only tune in through the radio, basically sort of anything he wants this person to be. So although he hasn't seen this girl for 20 years or whatever, she is now just a product. Is she out there? Is she a product of his imagination? I'm not describing this very well, but you have to see the show, ladies and gentlemen. But yeah, it was wanting to really, explore that interaction between human imagination and a piece of technology, and how that enriches lives, and it does sort of have a sort of sociological aspect as well, because it explores all these different ways and talks about these various different ways in which, especially at various points of life and in various life situations, radio is a lifeline. Radio is so important to people like me as a teenager or whatever, lying underneath the covers, listening to the John Peel show all the time, living out in the middle of nowhere in the sticks. And this was my connection with the world. This was my, you know, in the same way as was someone mentioned earlier about Radio Veronica and Radio Caroline. It was your connection with something dangerous, something different, something away from the world of your parents. You know, it's so important. It's so ubiquitous. I mean, possibly less so now with the advent of the internet and people being much more screens and online, but certainly through the 20th century, it's been absolutely ubiquitous in people's lives, and without even realizing it, you know, we're all so shaped by it. We're all so shaped. It's on in your house when you're growing up. It's something you turn into late at night when you need comfort. It's something that, you know, as I say, listening to the John Peel show, hearing this stuff that totally blows your mind and changes your whole outlook on life and leads you in a way that you would never have gone in before if it weren't for that radio. And so it's almost like so it's kind of celebrating radio and exploring some of its aspects and possibilities, really, and then, you know, tying that in with actually using radios to tell the story, because obviously so far it's just existed as a written story, and I performed it a couple of times at theatre festivals just as a story, just with me telling it as a, you know, sort of storytelling theatre. And now, you know, it will change. The huge amount of words will shrink down as more bits can be taken, you know, more of the work can be taken on by radios and things. And so, you know, less exposition, more show don't tell. That's what will happen. That's what they tell you, isn't it?
That's lovely. A really lovely response.
I was just going to put in as well, is like, obviously this has been an audio visual R&D experience, but one of the things that we certainly have talked about is to make this possibly an audio only experience as well, which should be something more like a traditional audio drama. But that's where, if you bring in the binaural mic into that, talk about intimate. You know, I know some of the BBC have done R&D with some audio drama. There's lots and lots of scope that we could go down that route as well as doing more traditional theatre, etc. Well, not that Jonny or Tara ever does traditional theatre, but you get my idea.
Oh, great. I mean, I would certainly tune in to a podcast or a radio show from the Radio Hut, definitely. I'm sure lots of the rest of the audience would as well. So some lovely comments coming through on the comments. So Laura had to head off, but just wanted to say it was a wonderful experience.
Yeah, I just wanted to say what I'm really interested in is, because this has all been taking place in a gallery space, which is quite an interesting combination of things going on. So you've got theatre, you've got audio, and you've got a visual arts space. And as an organisation, we're very interested in blurring all those boundaries. So it's a perfect project for us to have been able to play around like that. And
introduce who you are.
Oh, I'm Jo Leahy. I didn't know. I'm Jo Leahy. I'm director of SVA, we're hosting this space here. So, and I was involved in terms of making some of the films that you saw. So actually the gallery has really come into its own since lockdown and social distancing, because we've got this incredible, as you saw, big glass window space. And what we've been really wanting to do is give a sense to people of activity. There's all this activity going on behind in our studios, because we are allowed to carry on working in our studios here. but we wanted to give that visibility into the gallery, and we've been doing a whole series of projects like that over the last few months. And Tara and Johnny's project particularly has really kind of made the gallery come to life. We've literally been like doing sound leads out into the street with sounds of NASA and Radio Frenia Festival and things like that. So that's a whole other layer to this project that we haven't really talked about, but we probably don't have time to. But it's just I'm very interested in all those kind of aspects of this project. And I think having that, you know, the Arts Council is really sort of pushing towards like co-creation and work, you know, responding to audience feedback. And this is a perfect environment to do it because we've had so many people looking in the window, responding, listening in, and now we can obviously get some feedback here in this conversation here. And I think it's just really interesting, that meeting place between artists and audience, and that's exactly what the gallery is about.
Connecting up with you, this whole part of it.
Yeah, well, no, it's been a lovely experience. Go on, Brenda. Yes, you were.
Quick question. So I was just wondering, Tara, for you, how was it the experience of being in the window? I mean, you're clearly busy with many tasks and aware of the audience and interacting. How was it to be sort of exposed in that way, or to be,
it's been a really interesting space. I've actually been glad that it's been locked down because of the street being so quiet relatively, because it is so. I mean, also I think just personally, having been in kind of a quiet, much more inward and locked down place for most of this year, one way or another. And when we weren't, I was somewhere else, which was very quiet. So that it's also quite shocking when you're really quite exposed, and you have got this goldfish bowl effect. But I was also really grateful because I thought, when lockdown was announced, just in the whole span of this residency, I'm taking things out before lockdown is over. That there's this chance that there was this chance, nevertheless, to really concentrate on the work and be seen still, and to document it beautifully and to reach out through sound. So it's felt the weeks have actually been really peaceful, but there's been a lovely, just slow, gentle trickle, and that's just felt really good for me because I was in a kind of quiet space with a lot to do. And there were quite a few older people who were walking through town. We're in the central piece of pedestrianised street with a few cars that do go up and down. The marketplace on Saturday is very busy. So, I mean, that's the busiest time for Stroud in that, because people are still able to go to the market and they really want to. So Saturday's been a really interesting time because it suddenly had a lot of footfall and people peering in the windows. And it's been exciting. Then I really have felt like I'm playing around and I'm an exhibit in this space, you know, and I've been enjoying it too, that I've got something to get on with, but the people are clearly finding it, you know, enjoyable to just see and hear some sort of action. And yet we've got this kind of window between us. So like Joe said, it's actually been a perfect lockdown project and space, yeah. But a lovely clean, a lovely clean, minimal light space to work in and just to focus, really. Yeah, it's great.
I was wondering if it was actually even more successful because people couldn't come in and talk to you.
Exactly, it was. I mean, some people tried and then I'd have a few words out the window, but it was, I think so, because they would just absorb. And it was about sort of seeing and hearing and imagining what was going on. Little worlds coinciding somehow.
Lovely. Well, no, it's been a really we've loved having you all. So thank you so much for your really beautiful and wonderful work. So thank you. And thank you everyone in the audience who's come along. We've got a couple more weeks at the Digital Lyceum. Next week we've got 4 different pieces, all different artists experimenting with different ways of making video for the first time. And so there's 4 different really interesting pieces, very, very contrasting, which will be up for the whole from tomorrow morning all the way up to next Saturday, and we'll be having another discussion about those with all of those different artists who've been involved. And then in the final week we've got we've got Us Post 23.3, which is a new play by Kamal Khan about his family's experience in Bradford, particularly British Asian experience in Bradford during the first lockdown, and the kind of disproportionate effects on that. So that's going to be a live mixed, live streamed video on the 10th, 11th and 12th of December. And if you enjoyed tonight's show and haven't donated to the bar already, the way we survive and make this all work is by people buying us drinks at the bar through a donation. So please do that. It's very, very helpful. Most of it goes to the artists and a bit goes to us to cover all our time and costs. But yeah, that's us really. So thank you so much for being part of this, and thank you so much to the artists and those of us who are still here. Maybe we can just give a round of applause to the wonderful Droogdok and Maco, Tara and Stroud as well. Thank you. It's been absolutely wonderful. So thank you very much, guys. I'm going to hand over to Sam to... Yeah, thank you. I'll hand over to Sam to end the live stream. And that's us. Hopefully see you again soon. Thank you so much, guys.